Now, I'll hand over to my co-chair, Dr. Christine Lee, who will introduce the first of our plenary speakers for the day, for the morning.
Thank you, Jean. And I think our next speaker is well known to this community, almost needs no introduction, but I am happy to introduce him, Dr. Bob Gabbay, who was previously the Chief Medical Officer at the Joslin Diabetes Center and an Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School, is now our Chief Scientific and Medical Officer here at the American Diabetes Association. And he's joining us to outline how Precision Medicine in Diabetes initiative is fitting into the overall vision and goals of the ADA. And I'll turn things over to you, Dr. Gabbay.
Thank you. Let me pull up my slides here. One moment. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all, and I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to see this conference come together. Over 800 people from around the world, all focused on precision medicine and diabetes. And what I want to share with you today is some of where we were, where we are now, and where we're going in this initiative. And it really has been a thrill to be watching the evolution of this really important effort. So let me walk you through. First theme I'll tell you is this has taken a village. To get to where we are now has required hard work by many, many people. And this is only a subset of them. In particular, I want to recognize the Executive Oversight Committee, the leadership of Paul Franks, Stephen Rich, Lou Phillipson, John Nolan, and Bob Eckel. They literally have been meeting on a weekly basis for some years now, and I'll walk you through the timeline to imagine what this initiative could be, where it could go, and have laid the groundwork for what we'll be hearing today. They are supported by a world-class group of scientists and clinicians in the steering group, as well as advisors. And I also want to recognize from London University, Pramila Simming, that has helped us in organizing this meeting. Her work has really been critical as well. So what is the vision for this work? And it's really about, through the engagement of a broad group of stakeholders, and I'll emphasize that in a moment, and you'll hear that theme repeated and repeated. Our vision is realizing a longer, healthier life for people with diabetes, achieved by applying the appropriate treatment for the appropriate patient at the appropriate time. And as you can all appreciate, that's not exactly where we are today. And there's an opportunity to really change the way care exists for people with diabetes. And Stefano made a wonderful point in this year of the 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin. What better time for us to get together and imagine the future, the paradigm changing way in which diabetes will be cared for. So our overall objective is really about improving diabetes care by realizing the promise of precision medicine. And I'll share a little bit about what that promise is, and you over the next 3 days will get a more granular sense of what that is. So how did we get here? And this has really been a labor of love by a number of individuals, and really started with 3 people in particular: Paul Franks, Will Cephalou, that was in my position at the time, and you'll be hearing from later today, really provided a great deal of the intellectual vision for what this could be, along with John Nolan, our chairperson, this morning or afternoon or evening, depending where you are. That began in December. In January, the initiative was launched. We at the American Diabetes Association worked to create a task force. We partnered with EASD that summer. A mission statement and a plan was developed. Much of that is what we're still following in many ways. In the fall, a task force was created, and this was a multi-stakeholder group and relatively unique in the way in which many of us have approached problems. But that really, I believe, is going to be the success of this initiative, is bringing these partnerships together. Then there was the first symposium that was held at our scientific sessions in San Francisco. That continued onward with the important meeting in Madrid that brought stakeholders together to map out much of what the vision is currently. And now we are poised with the consensus report. And I encourage everyone to take a look at that, because it really lays out beautifully the science and the vision for what this initiative can be. And I'll share a bit of that in a moment. So this is the consensus report. You can see it on the website for the meeting. I really do encourage you to take the time to read this, because it lays out beautifully the story. So what are the goals of the initiative? You know, I think there are a number of different areas, and first it's figuring out how can we improve the diagnosis of diabetes. What do we mean by that? Well, we know that diabetes is more than one or two diseases. You could take type 2 diabetes. There are many subsets within that. How can we improve that? How can we understand the different forms of diabetes? Establishing what evidence we have and what evidence is needed, and this conference will help to do that in many ways. But ultimately, it's to develop practice guidelines and best practices in study design for future research that will lead to those guidelines. Once we have that, we want to educate and implement these best practices to really transform the way we deliver care. It will require establishing a research program to address a number of the important open questions, many of which will come up during the course of these next 3 days, and ultimately accelerate the process for getting access to trials and regulatory authorization to take what we discover scientifically and bring that into practice. And finally, it's really about changing our guidelines so that we are practicing and we're delivering care differently. So I mentioned that it takes a village, and many of you involved in these work groups are on this wonderful conference. But let me just highlight the 8 different work groups, literally 8 different work groups, each with numerous leaders in the scientific and clinical world that are defining these issues. Developing manuscripts to summarize the scientific research and where we can go. So first is around improving the diagnostics for known types of diabetes. Then precision therapeutics. What is the right treatment for the right individual? Using precision lifestyle for prevention. Can we use the plethora of data that we have to understand which lifestyle interventions are most effective for which individuals, and really target that treatment, that lifestyle change, whether it's nutritional or exercise or other things, more specifically. How can we use genetic risk scores in actual clinical management, in everyday care? What are the standards for implementation? Once we understand these things, how do we get that into practice, and how is that adopted? An area where we know from the time of scientific discovery to adoption can be many years. We want to shorten that gap. What are the treatment responses in type 1 diabetes? What more do we need to know there? What do we already know? And the promise of being able to prevent diabetes, which we're on the cusp of now, as you all know. And finally, how can we accelerate data access for trials using electronic medical records, biobanks, the plethora of data that we now have available that allows precision medicine to occur here and now, when 10 years ago, this would have been impossible. So what are some of the specific strategies? It will require us to work together to support research initiatives to really answer many of these questions. It will require enhanced use of data. And that really is the promise of precision medicine. We now have a host of omics data, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, that can be leveraged in a way that never could have been done before, merged with data that exists in electronic health records and patient registries, wearable device data that indicates an individual patient and what they're doing, to be able to merge that data together to drive care. That really is the vision. And then how do we take these learnings from research and the data to really recommend guidelines for clinical implementation? And ultimately, we need to then educate our healthcare provider colleagues, as well as people living with diabetes, to leverage all this knowledge and expertise. So ultimately, what we're talking about is going from the laboratory and the research on precision medicine, and ultimately taking that and transforming our standards of care. As you know, the American Diabetes Association publishes standards of care on a yearly basis. We want to be able to take that and bring it into what is the standard of care, so that clinicians around the world can leverage this knowledge and incredible work. So this only happens through partnership. And one of the things I'll say that I really pleased to see in the vision of the Executive Oversight Committee and others involved in this work, and many of you as part of this conference, is thinking of partnerships in a new way. And in particular, I'll highlight our relationships with industry. Historically, they had been largely transactional. And the model here that we envision is really more about a partnership where we're sitting together to think about solving problems, because it's really not going to be any one group that will be able to realize this broad vision. It's going to be through partnerships where we're working together to solve this problem. And there are some great examples in Europe where this has worked in other fields, and we're leveraging that model for what we can do together here. And it's going beyond the usual subjects, the usual suspects. Who else can we bring under the tent to solve this? And you'll see from the program, the participants at this meeting, that it is a wider swath of individuals that might normally be at any given initiative. So what has been our timeline? You know, we envision this happening over 4 phases. We've accomplished a lot in phase 1, and I've talked through some of these things. Having the initial symposium, bringing the task force together, identifying where the vision of where things were moving. We're now in phase 2. Where with appropriate funding collectively, we'll look to be able to fund new research projects, be able to bring together, as we are today, this meeting, which is an important milestone in the movement forward. And then we imagine in the ensuing years, it's going to be research that translates into clinical guidelines that ultimately leads to change of practice by educating both providers and people living with diabetes on how they can incorporate this. I want to end with just a special thank you to this incredible Executive Oversight Committee. They have been so passionate about this work. Their leadership is why we are all here today. And they really deserve special recognition. And you can see these are each individual person, an amazing scientist and clinician that collectively have just moved this field forward enormously. And so really want to thank all of them. I wish you all a very productive, stimulating meeting. And I know this will be a historic moment in the movement of precision medicine for diabetes.
Thank you, Dr. Gabbay. I think it's wonderful that the ADA has partnered with EASD to start this really important initiative with the goal of improving diabetes care with precision medicine approaches. We do have a few minutes now for a Q&A session, so I do encourage those of you attending to put your questions into the chat box so that Dr. Gabbay can address them. While we're waiting for people to log into the chat, I'm going to start with asking a couple of questions here. I think the ADA does an amazing job with summarizing guidance in guidelines like the standards of care and other consensus statement. It's an enormous amount of work. And I'm curious to know, as we develop more evidence for precision diagnosis, precision prognosis, precision prevention and therapy, it seems like it's going to get more and more challenging to summarize all that information into guidelines for providers to be educated in knowing, which drug do I use for which person with diabetes, and not get too overwhelmed. And so I'm curious to know how you see an organization like ADA tackling that, in being able to, as you showed as one of the main goals, education of providers and patients on this growing and increasingly complex body of knowledge for precision medicine in diabetes care.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, Dr. Lee. And one of the challenges that we all have in diabetes is that over the years, it has not gotten simpler, it's gotten more complicated, and the need to individualize care in a great many ways. And you could even look at our standards of care that has progressively grown in length, and even our abridged version that we write for primary care is still quite long. And so I think one of the important things that we're going to need to work on is how to translate that information and in some ways simplify it. And that's where I think we can leverage technology a great deal. Through electronic health records, other apps, other technology, to be able to bring that information in real time to clinicians, to be able to know with the patient in front of them right now, based on their parameters, what do I need to do? Or what are the options? And that I think is going to be a parallel effort to the work that we're talking about here. Part of precision medicine and the right treatment for the right patient is be able to convert that knowledge into real-time alerts, reminders, knowledge for providers, literally when they're across from their patient.
Great, thank you. And just one last question, I think we have some time. You made this very important point about partnerships and maybe some other additional outside players. And we can see from this morning session, the list, and as well as the agenda for the next couple of days, that there have been clear partnerships that have been made with organizations like the ADA and EASD that educate and raise awareness with patients themselves and with funding agencies and pharma. I'm curious to know, though, there are some initiative goals that include getting regulatory authorization, moving perhaps new therapies down the pipeline quicker for subgroups of people, needing to account for legal, ethical, regulatory considerations with implementation. And it seems like key partnerships may include regulatory agencies. Can you speak to any current or future plans to include such stakeholders in the initiative moving forward?
Another wonderful point. And absolutely, we view this initiative as being as inclusive as possible. It is critical to engage all of the partners, including those in the regulatory world, when we are sort of poised to be able to move that forward. From the American Diabetes Association perspective, we've recently enhanced our interactions and staffing around working with the Food and Drug Administration as one example, where we feel our role can be an important voice along with many others on this conference to drive through the appropriate treatments when they are ready for approval.
Thank you. And I don't see specific questions, but I do want to acknowledge a couple comments that are in the chat. And a lot of this, there's a theme here that I'm seeing with regards to how do you apply precision medicine in, say, developing countries, and what are plans to extend it? And I think we do have more of a global extension here in the subsequent days that our speakers are going to be from different countries talking about this topic. But I wonder if you had any additional comments along this line with applying precision medicine into other countries globally.
Yes, this is where I really believe that technology offers an opportunity. So one could even imagine, the distribution of mobile phones around the world is astounding. And if we could bring much of the knowledge and precision aspects of diabetes, right treatment, right person, right time, into someone's smartphone, which is imaginable, that allows that knowledge to spread far faster than it ever could have 10 years ago. And so I think it's going to be important that part of this effort thinks about low-cost solutions that can be applied globally.
Thank you.